It's simply keeping faith with the British people. We were elected to get Brexit done. We had 3.5 years after the original referendum result when Parliament didn't honour that mandate. Now we will. We will make sure that we bring forward the legislation to leave the European Union this week, and we'll get it concluded by the 31st of January. That means that we will be out on that date, and then we will have conversations with the EU about our new relationship in the future based on free trade and friendly cooperation.
Well, Michel Barnier, of course, who's continuing with the EU trade negotiations, said it's impossible to get a deal by December 2020. And this is just going to, the fear is that this is just going to tie the government's hands. You've made this commitment and then we're going to be facing a prospect of yet another no-deal Brexit.
No, the EU are committed in the political declaration, the document that both the UK and the EU signed together, to concluding these conversations by the end of 2020. So we'll leave on the 31st, and then the wrap-up conversations that follow, both sides are committed in black and white to concluding by 2020.
So you're absolutely confident we are going to get a deal that everyone's going to be happy with?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And are you continuing with Operation Yellowhammer, your no-deal planning, or is that all in place now?
We'll be having a different approach. We'll be preparing for life outside the EU. So that means that we'll be preparing for life outside the single market and the customs union. That means that businesses will adjust and we'll help them to adjust. But it also means that there'll be bright new opportunities for trade with other countries, and also for us to develop in the UK the laws and the regulations that we think are right in order to encourage growth so that people can invest in high-paying jobs. And
you're tipped in a February reshuffle to be taking on a much wider-ranging brief involving international trade and negotiations. January the 31st, we're out. How soon, in days, weeks, months, are we going to be signing free trade deals with the likes of the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, China, India?
We're lining those up, and of course what we want to do is to make sure that we can sign those deals just as we do a great new deal with the European Union as well.
But you're confident that they're going to be weeks or months, or are they going to take years as well?
No, I think in short order with some countries. Other countries it'll take a little bit longer. But I think we've got a parliament now committed to making sure that we make the most of life outside the European Union. And that means not just trade deals with other countries. It also means making laws to suit ourselves. It also means an Australian-style points-based immigration system so that we can decide who comes here and on what terms. And it also means taking back control of our agriculture and fisheries so that we can support farmers and our coastal communities better than ever before.
Well, as we plan to leave one union, there's also the prospect of another union breaking up. Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP leader and First Minister of Scotland, is setting out her plans today for how she wants to go about making sure she does get her second independence referendum 5 years on from the 2014 independence referendum. Given that you believe in self-determination of the British people, as you do as a Leaver, why are you stopping the Scottish people having another chance to determine their future?
Well, I think we should respect referendums. And we had a referendum in 2016 to leave the European Union, and that's what we're doing. We also had a referendum in 2014 on whether or not Scotland should stay in the United Kingdom. And the SNP said at the time that this was a once-in-a-generation choice. And I think that we should respect that. And we should get on with delivering that second referendum result, and also making sure that the benefits of unleashing the whole United Kingdom's potential are felt in every part of the United Kingdom, from Banff to Bude and Budleigh Salterton.
But nevertheless, where the SNP, their Scottish Parliament elections, they had a mandate in their manifesto that said, if there's a material change in circumstances, which leaving the EU would be, given the campaign in 2014 for remaining in the United Kingdom was, you'll have to leave the EU. You'll be out on your ear if you leave the UK, because the UK is still a member of the EU. In which case, it's now turned on its head. Got more information, it's only reasonable they get another say, surely.
Well, the United Kingdom is the most successful political union that there's been, and we left one union that didn't work, the European Union, and we should preserve the union that does work, the union of
But isn't that up to the
England,
people of Scotland?
Wales and Northern Ireland. Well, they voted in 2014, and they were pretty clear then that they wanted the United Kingdom to continue as a political unit, and I think we should respect that vote.
OK, well, let's talk about respecting votes. Nicky Morgan decided not to stand for election last Thursday, and yet she's continuing in the Cabinet as Culture Secretary. Now, whether or not you like Nicky Morgan or agree with her politics or not, she can't be questioned by MPs. She can't be kicked out by her constituents. Is that really right in a modern 21st century democracy to have someone sitting in the Cabinet responsible for a huge swathe of government policy about the internet control and the media that we see, to not be accountable to British people?
Well, all government ministers are accountable to Parliament, but critically, Nicky is a brilliant person. We're really lucky to have her.
But isn't that
in
irrelevant?
No,
when it comes to democracy, that's irrelevant, isn't it? She's not elected.
I think it's highly relevant. But more than that, we've had in the past, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, we had talented people like Peter Mandelson and Andrew Adonis, who were Cabinet Ministers and in the House of Lords. I think when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, we had Lord Falconer, Charlie Falconer, who was a very talented chap who was also in the House of Lords and sat in the Cabinet. So there's plenty of precedent for it. And certainly when you've got someone of Nicky's outstanding talents, then it's great to have them available to serve in government. OK,
well, you've got the first Cabinet meeting today, the government Cabinet and also political Cabinet as well with your Prime Minister. You had the drinks last night. Was it 109 new Conservative MPs? Lots of talk, though, that there's going to be quite a big shake-up in not just in Westminster, the House of Lords. Cabinet is going to go down by about 5. Lots of people who normally attend Cabinet as a sort of a sop to them, even if they're not Cabinet Ministers, are no longer going to be able to attend. Is this time for a big shake-up of how our government is run?
Well, the Prime Minister is clear that he wants government to deliver and to make sure that it's more effective and responsive. And it's all our responsibilities as ministers to make sure that we help him in that mission. The public, I think, don't mind too much who sits in what seat or how many people sit around the table. What they want to do is to ensure that we deliver. So, for example, that the additional investment in the National Health Service that we've promised is there. The additional support that we're going to give to schools to make opportunity more equal across the country is delivered. So, of course, it's important for the Prime Minister to make sure that his team is properly constructed and aligned. But the top priority is to make sure that we deliver for the British people. OK,
let's just finally, the Labour leadership obviously is now up for grabs. Lots of different people's names apparently are going to be thrown into the ring. Some Corbynistas, some very critical of Jeremy Corbyn. Which Labour potential leader would you, as Michael Gove, Conservative Cabinet Minister, fear most?
Caroline Flint.
She can't be. She's an MP. She's no longer MP anymore. So
I know, that's the thing.
But of the people who are available for the job?
Well, I think, this is the difficulty that Labour face, that so many of the people who I admire in the Labour Party are no longer MPs. I mean, Caroline Flint would be an outstanding leader, Ian Austin, John Woodcock. They are all people who would be great leaders and who would be, potential heads of government, but they're not available to the Labour Party. And that, I think, says something about the position the Labour Party finds itself in. If
Rebecca Long-Bailey ended up as the Corbynista favourite as the Labour leader, do you think that she would be a threat to your party?
Well, you have to respect all politicians who put themselves forward for leadership positions. It's not an easy thing to do, and I wish Rebecca Long-Bailey well. But I'm not a Labour politician, and I think that it's a pity that the Labour Party has reduced its ranks so that many of the people who I think and many Labour voters think would be good people to be in a leadership role are no longer eligible.
Was last Thursday a surprise?
No, not if you've been following the opinion polls intelligently. The opinion polls started off on average with a 10-point Conservative lead. They ended the election with, on average, almost a 10-point Conservative lead. Two of the final polls actually had the 12-point lead that transpired, and two others had an 11-point lead. So it was, yes, slightly at the higher end of the range that the polls were anticipating. But a double-digit Conservative lead was what the polls have been pointing to pretty consistently throughout the election campaign. And to that extent, nobody should be surprised about what happened. Equally, the fact that the Conservatives gained ground in Leave voting constituencies, including those that voted Labour, while actually falling back to some degree in the much more pro-Remain parts of the country, was also something that was utterly and completely anticipated by the opinion polls, and it was very clear in the structure of public opinion.
And what do you put it down to? Was this the Brexit election? Was this about Jeremy Corbyn's failings? Was it about the stardust, which apparently is still has emerged around Boris Johnson? Many people thought he didn't have that. What's the single biggest factor, or is it a multiple?
As often in life, it's to try to segment is to ask the wrong question, because the answer is that it's all three of the above. And it's the interaction between all three that matters. So let me explain. First of all, Brexit undoubtedly was crucial. The foundation of the Conservative vote, Conservative success above all, was not through smashing Jeremy Corbyn, it was through smashing Nigel Farage. The Conservative share of the vote amongst Leave voters increased from 55% at the beginning of the campaign to, according to Lord Ashcroft, 73% by polling day. And it was the squeeze on the Brexit Party vote that was the single most important reason as to why the Conservatives won. And bear in mind, the Conservative vote is now overwhelmingly a pro-Leave vote. Support for the Conservatives amongst Remain voters was less than it was 2 years ago, and is much less than it was 4 years ago. So that's point one. Point two, then, about Boris Johnson's stardust. Boris Johnson does have stardust. He has stardust for Leave voters, including, above all, for many of those who had previously been inclined to vote for the Brexit Party. On the other hand, he's deeply disliked by those on the Remain side, but the point is that's not what he was trying to achieve. He was trying to concentrate the Leave vote behind the Conservatives. That's what he was able to do, and the fact that he's popular with at least one half of the country is central to that. Then, sure, Jeremy Corbyn is also an issue. He's an issue in part, particularly for Leave voters, because he represents, or is thought by them many of them to represent, the kind of metropolitan, socially liberal outlook to which many pro-Leave voters are antagonistic. But then Corbyn obviously also was a problem more generally, because even amongst Remain voters, he wasn't that popular. And although the Labour Party, the one thing it achieved during the election campaign was to succeed in squeezing the Liberal Democrat vote to a fair degree, even then amongst Remain voters, the Labour Party was weaker than it was back in 2017. And when people got asked, there was no Corbyn mania this time. Jeremy Corbyn didn't manage to turn the perceptions on around the way he did 2 years ago.
He was rather better known, was he? Well, let's talk about him. Corbyn mania is certainly over, but it doesn't look like Corbynista mania in the Labour Party is over in terms of the Labour leadership contest. Right now, the Labour Party, as all parties do who have a big defeat like that, have to learn the lessons and try to decide how to sort of rebuild. Realistically, it would be an astonishing achievement if they were able to get a majority in just one election. Lots of people are talking about it being, we're talking 8, 9, 10 years before the Labour Party could be back in power. So they've got time to do this. But we're hearing today about a Rebecca Long-Bailey joint dream ticket, is the phrase being used, with Angela Rayner, so the Shadow Business Secretary and the Shadow Education Secretary. Rebecca Long-Bailey, very much the anointed Corbynista by McDonnell and Corbyn. Have you done any polling? Would she be someone who could take on Boris Johnson?
Well, the short answer to Julia is that probably only about 10% of the people who are listening to this conversation have the foggiest idea who Rebecca Long-Bailey is, because she's not somebody who's so far been a high-profile figure as far as the wider public is concerned. So the truth is that it's a blank page, but the crucial thing would be if she were to become leader, she would need to make sure a favourable page was painted off her fairly rapidly. One thing that we do know is that she acquitted herself quite well in the leadership debate that she participated in. Various points one can. One advantage that any successor to Jeremy Corbyn will have is that they will not have the 35 year of record to potentially throw at them. So, in Jeremy Corbyn's case, it was still, all the comments about the IRA and Hamas and et cetera. Whereas virtually anybody who's been talked about now is probably somebody who hasn't been in the House of Commons for much more than 4 years and is much, much younger. So they won't have anything like in the way of baggage surrounding them. And quite well likely to be the Labour Party, which is now quite phenomenally a majority female parliamentary party, It certainly would. You can see why it might be thought to make sense for it to have a female leader to epitomise that quite substantial change in its ranks. So, point one. Point two, I mean, there doesn't seem to be much evidence that Labour's policy platforms were particularly unpopular, although not necessarily as popular as the Conservative ones. I think that the Labour Party, however, what it failed to do during the election campaign was to tell us what its policy platform was meant to mean, to paint a picture of the kind of country it was trying to create. It was still very much still caught into, we hate the Tories, we're against austerity, we're going to stop austerity, etc., etc. But actually explaining what a Corbynite Labour Britain would look like was not conveyed. I mean, in particular, as epitomised by the fact that the only catchphrase that anybody ever heard, took in and understood was "Get Brexit done." There was no equivalent catchphrase on the Labour side.
And that was crucial, wasn't it?
Labour could not summarise what it was about.
Yeah, what was the headline policy? We go back to Tony Blair and those pledge cards, those 5 key pledges. I think I probably could all recount them all right now. In terms of lessons learned for the Labour Party, in terms of policy as opposed to personality, there are lots on the left who will say, look, we just need to go further and harder. We just, we need to be further left. We need to promise more free things, more nationalisation. But the conventional wisdom seems to be, actually, if you look at people who win elections, they are on the middle ground. Do we still only see victories now in the UK on the middle ground, on the centre ground? Or does that centre ground shift quite a lot?
Julia, the answer to that is Boris Johnson is not on the middle ground on Brexit. He took an extreme position on Brexit and pursued it. But the point is he did so on an issue where we knew very well that public opinion was polarised. So the answer to the question is it depends on the character of public opinion, and what Labour Party needs to establish is what indeed are likely to be the social and economic concerns, not that exist now, what are likely to be the social and economic concerns that are troubling the public in 4 or 5 years' time. They have to try to anticipate them and to come up with a programme that meets those concerns. It's not a question whether it's centre, whether it's extreme, it's whether it's opposite for the mood of the public at that particular point in time.
Well, I'm hoping they're going to have a few new sort of breaths of fresh air coming in the new Parliament. We've got 109 new Tory MPs. I heard one on with Julia Hartley-Brewer this morning who sounded terrific, I must say. And Lib Dem Daisy certainly hit the ground running, so she's obviously going to be somebody to focus on over the course of the day. She knows what she wants, even though nobody agrees with her.
But she's clearly learnt nothing.
No.
I mean, this is the metropolitan liberal elite, however you want to describe them, protecting their own yet again.
Yeah.
I mean, Swinson should be nowhere near the House of Lords. She's, 30 years old? She's not very old, is she?
No, I don't think so.
She should go out and get a job and understand what life's all about and come back and stop talking such total nonsense.
Yes, exactly.
I had to really struggle for the word total then. I was thinking of something else. It's just unbelievable that these people think they can carry on saying the same things, even when they've just got trounced at the polls, and carry on with the same old nonsense. And if it all goes wrong, we'll have a nice comfy retirement on the House of Lords at 30 years old.
Yes, well, exactly right. And, I mean, only the Lib Dems, as I say, could have this rather sort of ridiculous position, which is counterintuitive to their own policy. They want to abolish the House of Lords, but they want to send more people in first.
Exactly. I mean, it's just ludicrous. I mean, what we should do with the House of Lords is get rid of a lot of them. And, it is there to primarily to actually go into the detail of legislation.
Yeah.
So why not make it an invitation-only thing? And when they're discussing a law bill, invite in a lot of lawyers to look at the legislation. If we're looking at a health service bill, invite some doctors in to have a look at it and make some suggestions.
Yeah.
And actually use it properly. And, then they could have their £300 a day for a couple of weeks' work coming in to look at a particular bill. It's hardly rocket science, is it?
It really isn't. And to also scrutinise with more and more sort of alacrity something that's already been scrutinised, you kind of don't really need it, do you?
Well, I do wonder. I mean, our whole political system needs root and branch review because our MPs don't work for us. We've seen that over the last 3 years, and thank God we've got a government with a majority, and hopefully they'll be able to get things done.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, all of the stuff she said about, we will continue with our policy of remaining in the European Union and delaying the possibility of leaving it. Has she not looked at the numbers? That ain't going to happen.
Well, she's going to be out of power forever. Not that they've been in power other than coalition, but I mean, all the Labour MPs that are doing exactly the same thing. They're not listening to the people. They don't understand. They're not in touch. and we need to clear them out and get people in there with some life experience and some connection to people in various.
And I mean, there are
parts
some who do have that, right? And the thing that I'm fascinated by is this kind of switch in language now, where you get the Labour Party saying our policies are very popular. The reason they think their policies are very popular is they only talk to people in the Labour Party. And the people in the Labour Party, when you say, oh, yeah, everybody loves these policies, but they didn't vote for them purely because they voted for Brexit, which they said they wouldn't do because it wasn't the Brexit election. Now we've got Lib Dems saying that their share of the vote went up, but somehow they ended up with less than 50% of the MPs that they had when they started.
Well, I mean, they always do this. They spin it. But I mean, I watched Have I Got News for You last night, where, Johnson was lambasted as a liar by all the lefties that they gathered together for the show. But what are Labour and Liberals do? They're lying about the results.
Yes.
It wasn't our fault. We got people calling voters stupid again. We should have another election. We should have another vote. That'll be coming up soon. And it beggars belief that these people don't learn from their mistakes.
So were you kind of ahead of the game in getting a book out about John Bercow? Was this prior to him really going stratospheric in terms of global recognition and the division which we know follows the man around?
Yes, well, very, very nice of you to highlight my incredible degree of foresight.
Indeed, the prophetic nature of Friedman is well known, of course.
Well, exactly. I won't talk about what my prediction was for the election this week. But what I can tell you is that I did think with John Bercow when he became Speaker, and this is when I started thinking about writing a book, was that he was always someone who had divided people. People either loved him or they hated him. And what we saw over the last couple of years is really that writ large, that people do get the most incredible emotions about him. But the interesting thing is, outside of the UK, he is genuinely liked pretty much universally, whereas in the UK, of course, there is this massive split. For people abroad, they tend to have watched PMQs, Prime Minister's Questions, and they see him in the chair and they see the theatrics, and they rather like all of that because, of course, they weren't dealing with the day-to-day political implications of the way in which he acted as Speaker. So there's a bit of a divide between us in the UK and people elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, we know that in Germany there are T-shirts that have order on them, and you can buy the merch, if you are so inclined to do so. But I suppose if you're in another country, you're not seeing the kind of potential implications that we are here, and that is the, bringing an office into disrepute. He turned up on an Italian quiz show, didn't he, or a light entertainment show last night or the night before, shouting order in Italian because the audience, the host said, "Come on, Mr. Bercow, do any order thing," and so he did it, and everybody laughed, and happiness ensued in the studio.
Well, yes. I mean, he was a bit of a performing monkey, really. Looking at him on the Italian TV program the other day, it was rather a bizarre interview because it seemed that he wasn't speaking Italian. They obviously were, and then he was shouting a few words, Federer, as in Roger Federer being one of them and order being the other. But look, I mean, he is going to make a huge amount of money out of his role. What he has successfully done over the past year or two is, in terms of the international political stage, he has taken a job which is certainly important generally in British politics, but is not one where you are an international statesman or stateswoman. And he has changed that, the perception of it globally, into a role as if he was, in fact, an incredibly important statesman. And so I think he's going to make an awful lot of money in the same way that former prime ministers or former US presidents can do, where they can go around the world and command huge fees. And John Bercow has always wanted more money. He's always felt that he needed a bit more. So when he was an MP, a backbench MP, he got jobs outside of Parliament for all sorts of different people, wanted a bit more cash. And I think now he will look at this as his opportunity to really cash in on the profile that he's created for himself.
Bobby, I don't know if you watched Mr. Bercow on Sky News on election night, for which, as Ian just said, he may or may not have been paid £60,000 or £80,000. But as the night went on and the story became obvious, you could almost see the tears welling up in his eyes. You know him, you've written a book about him. How will he be feeling now that all his efforts over the past 3 years to thwart Brexit came to nothing?
well, I imagine he'll be pretty gutted. I mean, he is someone who put himself right at the forefront of the Remain campaign because, of course, although he was nominally the impartial speaker, John Bercow always likes to take up a cause, and he likes to be the person banging the drum most strongly for that cause. And that's what he did over Brexit. So he decided that we should remain, and therefore he became the strongest advocate for Remain in this country. And in many ways, he was the most effective politician in this country in stopping Brexit, because the various decisions that he took tended to favour one side of the debate rather than the other. And so I think he'll have been very upset by that outcome. And of course, the other aspect to this is how much of a rift there has been between him and his former party, the Conservative Party. So whereas he once was a very right-wing member of the Tory party, he went through this political journey and fell out with pretty much most members of the Tory parliamentary party. So I imagine from that perspective, he won't have been delighted either.
In terms of the kind of work he's doing, I mean, I was just looking down this sort of list of where he's been making. It's not just turning up on Sky News or Italian TV. November the 15th, he spoke at a business breakfast in County Kildare in Ireland for an organisation. A fortnight later, November the 29th, he appeared for at a letting agency conference, Deep Joy, called The Negotiator in Park Lane. December the 4th, keynote speaker, Financial Times Banking Summit. The following day, made a speech at the annual reception of UK Cloud Limited, a cloud computing company. The list goes on. I mean, this is a guy who's, let's say he's charging 10,000 quid a time, and I would imagine it's in that ballpark, if not more. He's doing rather nicely out of this, Bobby. This was a man that said if he profited from his job, it would leave a bad taste.
Yeah, this is major league cashing in, isn't it?
It is cashing in, and it's going to be an awful lot of money. Personally, I think probably 10 grand is probably on the light side for what he's going to be paid for something like that. And I'm sure he was giving some speeches in the US over the summer and had to come back when Parliament ended up being recalled after the prorogation. And I'm sure he will earn huge amounts of money, both in the UK and, as I say, all around the world. And it is a bit of cashing in. But in fairness to him, all politicians do this. So there are lots of aspects of his role where he did go back on what he said he'd do. He said he would only stand for what would have been 9 years. He, of course, overstayed that by well more than a year. And his speakership in some ways wasn't what it promised to be, particularly over the impartiality. So, yes, this is another in that long line. But as I say, all politicians do seem to do this.